Okay, so cool of you guys to join me today. I wanted to talk about the value of friction. This talk's sort of based around a few themes: payment, prototyping, and a little bit about tachyon particles. It starts with Studio 358, which, for those of you who don't know, is the interdisciplinary design program where we get to work with our colleagues on different teams. I've been a part of it a few times, thanks to the organization of Sam and Laura. And on this time, they gave us a really interesting prompt around mobile payments. And they asked the question of what might Nokia do to deliver consumer-friendly device security and drive the adoption of mobile payments in the market. So there was a really interesting group of 5 of us. Not everyone was from design. We had some business heads, some marketeers, research. And you kind of start, as always, by mapping out the problem and seeing what the key themes were. So obviously when we're talking about wearables and payments, we start thinking about security and issues around trust. And how do we make sure that someone feels that this transaction's a trusted one? What kind of authenticity measures can we provide? We looked a lot around how to actually release products, thinking of business models and challenges around, is Nokia really right for credit card partnerships or more with phone carrier partnerships? But really, I think the key theme that I was interested in and the group focused on, and that I want to talk about today, is really around this idea of the invisible transaction. So I think a lot of the leaders in mobile payment right now in the field, I'd cite guys like John Lunn at PayPal and Jack Dorsey at Square, seem to be really driven by the goal to make payments totally frictionless. So the Square model fantasy is really that you would walk into a coffee shop, you would have a conversation with a barista, they would pass you your common order, and you would walk out without really even noticing transactions taking place. The idea is that your technology, your mobile phone, and the stores of technology really can facilitate a more human interaction that's not broken down by some digital interaction. And I think it's a nice story. It occurs to us that actually that we already have invisible transactions. They're part of our day-to-day. I think the Oyster card's a good example of NFC, touch and tap. It's obviously now in our phones as well. So we can see that being the next logical step. I think an interesting sticking point on the Oyster example is around, so for instance, the market share I think they have is 52 million Oyster cards in circulation. By comparison, there's 26 million NFC visas. So they really have more people using Oysters than even comfortable or currently using Visa cards. But how many of you, so you guys all have Oysters, how many of you have them registered at TFL?
Nope.
And so then, how many of you know about the auto top-up feature that TFL offers on your Oyster?
I'm aware of it, but I don't use it.
Know about it?
No,
So,
same thing.
okay, so 30% awareness. So yeah, what's interesting is that, so I've got this feature that I think is, it's the epitome of frictionless, because when my Oyster balance gets down to 8 pounds or 10 pounds, auto tops up, debiting my bank account. I don't have to pay any attention. I'm never caught out late at night needing to struggle with a new step to go and top up my card. But it's compelling to me that so few people are actually taking advantage of the auto top up. It's something like of 22 million active cards, about half of those are registered at TFL, and about 200 to 400,000 K are actually using this auto top up. So it's about 1% of the Oyster users are comfortable with this sort of frictionless transaction. I think the challenge with invisibility can also be framed around a few of our interests at Nokia, specifically around emerging markets, where we have to imagine a different kind of user who's maybe not just looking for new ways to deplete their bank accounts, but maybe views a relationship with money in a different way. And then specifically, I think there's this interesting challenge around debt. And we're in that sort of culture of debt now. And I think asking the question of, is that something we should really be facilitating, or should we rather be reframing the problem and saying, should already too smooth transactions actually be becoming more visible? So, I mean, currently it's a little too easy to rack up transactions without paying attention to them. So it started, the output of our 358 day was really sharing a bunch of ideas to IPR to see if we had anything worth pursuing further. And this one was on this problem, the physical relationship to the value of money. So it really can all be very vague. I think that's one of the charms of the process. But so the wording here is a gizmo's perceived weight changes with the value of a user's transaction, tying in like the weight of coins leaving your pocket. So how can we bring people back to this physical sense of money? And they were interested. They wanted me to explore more what how this would work, or what that relationship would be like. And so as we might do, started sketching out some ideas around like a wristband that could grow and contract through like an inner bladder that could fill up somehow. Maybe there's some material that loosens and grows or constricts.
It's on the idea of being tight. So when it's tight,
yeah,
you're
tightness
tight.
is good feedback, exactly. It could get tighter and tighter so that you feel a kind of pressure. That's right.
It's painful.
But actually, the bit that IPR were particularly interested, so there's like all this other feedback you could get around. You know, the color could change, it could vibrate, you could do sound feedback, smell if you're being really creative. Heat actually is another idea, but all those things have kind of been known. Google has a patent on like something that does a subtle heat feedback. But somehow I like the idea of something like literally burning a hole in your pocket if you had too much money, so you'd have to go buy new pants until your device sort of cooled down. Anyway, they were really only interested in this idea of weight itself, wondering like, hey, you know, Newton says you can't have something that increases in weight without adding new mass, which seems like a problem. It might derail the whole process of trying to think about a wearable feedback on payments. But luckily, I started thinking of this other 20th century physicist, Gene Roddenberry. Here see him on the deck of the Enterprise, which is where he does all his research. And thanks to the other invention of time travel through the TV set, we actually know about warp drive and how when we bend space-time, particles moving at the speed of light actually increase in mass because their velocity can't move any faster as you add energy to the system. Therefore, this addition of mass is easily possible just using these particles in our devices. So basically, I sidestepped the problem of worrying about mass. I just realized it's not really my job. As a user experience designer, really I just want to get at the meat of what's the minimum feedback loop that has some relevance on our wearer's kind of experience. So actually there's this really nice example from MIT. It's a wallet that inflates when you're cash rich and then deflates when you're cash poor. It also has this nice hinge that actually increases the friction of trying to open it. So when you're skint, it's like physically hard to open your wallet and get out of your cash. This is a little product demo that those guys did. Just worth flipping through maybe. Just showing the concept of how it's growing. So you see, this is a pretty good prototype. And really what I was after is what kind of a prototype can I make to test this concept of what the physical weight or some physicality to a transaction on a wearable. So I went to an Arduino workshop and started trying to think high-tech about how you could use processing and an accelerometer. Really, this is also a cool group worth mentioning in London called Technology Will Save Us. But really, this was just exploring some technology that might help us create prototypes. It wasn't really right for this one because, really what I'm after is just what feels. I don't need a fancy technical demo to do that. So really, what it came down to was really simplifying and cutting it back to what's some way that I can just take on the challenge of paying attention to financial transactions and then seeing what comes out and what's relevant. So I kind of made this pledge to get rid of my wallet, and I've just started using this notebook as my wallet, into which I keep my whatever credit card and Oyster card, and importantly, I keep a tally on every £5 transaction. So I'm just trying to introduce a little bit of awareness into my day-to-day. But I needed sort of a tidier way of doing this. I need something to more closely replicate or simulate an actual wearable process. So I started going to pound stores and found this Snap bracelet and thought I could keep score of every time I spent some money and just bring that awareness into my day-to-day. Sort of doing that for a few days, but ultimately it's a bit messy. It's like I had to really pull myself out of what I was doing in order to commit to this thing, and that's way too much friction. If what we're trying to test is just a really subtle friction, or what's the minimum amount of feedback you need to give someone. This test wasn't really working. Yeah, we talked about tightness as being kind of relevant. I thought a little bit about pinpricks. Like, could a little bit of pain actually be interesting if it's not really hurting? It's just feedback. So I tried these pins and a piece of string, but it was way too fragile. Put those pins into this piece of silicone, which actually worked pretty well. It's the most kind of high-end. I thought it looked pretty cool with it on my bicep. But the problem with all of these actually is that they're all about tallying, and so you are really just, you look down and you're keeping score. You really see like, oh, I've done 5 units today. I think one thing that was an interesting revelation was after one day of spending, whatever this was, 6 units of red, I then had like a day of only 1 unit, which I marked with a different color. So I had this feedback, this feeling like, oh, I should spend more money. Like I haven't spent what I used yesterday. So it's interesting, the tallies actually seem to be having this inverse effect on, or at least against my hypothesis of, rather than sort of showing you a cumulativeness. There was something sort of nervous about how I felt compelled to spend money. Really trying to get back to that idea of weight, like what would be the right weight and what could I do to test weight. So I was really hung up on it, and I bought some crappy paper clips and this stupid thing from the pharmacy that's like enormous and hilarious. And obviously I wasn't gonna commit to a week in this. Fashioned an inner tube into a ring, which I could put nuts at every transaction, really trying to get to something that felt weighty, felt like it was somehow inhibited when I'm spending. This one looked pretty tidy. It doesn't do well in the shower, and it was really hard to actually get more stuff in there when you're for instance, buying coffee. So maybe not surprisingly, you have to come back to something really simple. And so anything highfalutin, just turned out I didn't like it. It didn't work. But what has been working out are these elastic bands. Pop one on at another 10-pound increment. They have this interesting effect of actually leaving a mark, sort of signing a history, so that it's not like they're not there even when you've taken them off. You sort of can't forget about this impact of your spending. I think what's really good about them is how vague it is. So unlike the tallies that we talked about, either keeping score on a list or on something physical, I think I've done this prototype does a good job of capturing the initial goal, which was not to specifically keep track of a budget, but just to have some sense of comparison between something that's quite small and something that's more significant. And already, so here I'm nearing the end of my first week of these prototypes, and already I'm seeing like, I think, next step will be, it's clear to me I need to reset this. Like, it's a little bit too painful. It's a little bit too tight. And rather than saying that that's a problem with my spending behavior, which I'm not prepared to do, I'd rather just say what I think I should do is reset it after 1 week and then start again. And maybe there'll be something interesting about how this feels compared to where I am next week, whether I have any sort of strong behavioral sense of consequences. So taking qualitative notes kind of whenever an idea here strikes me, and basically just pursuing the experiment. Just going to see what happens. So I can report back later. Maybe also worth mentioning that I think as I talked about the processing and the Arduino accelerometer stuff, I have a tendency in prototyping to want to go straight for like new technology and big technology. It's a fun opportunity to learn. I think that you should still nurture that attitude, that goal. So like for me, this was a great opportunity to check out some software I hadn't been sort of ignoring and knowing was interesting. So processing has this great, it's basically Java-based, but it has this great new feature in the new release where you can actually export the code straight to Android. So you can go from like a really quick mock-up of a concept into a fully functional Android app, so something you could be carrying around in your pocket without any reliance on engineers. This could all be like starting and ending in design. So kind of came up with this prototype stack, like what would be the pieces I'd need to test the tech, and sort of failed to get through all of them. But I could probably wrap there. This was some concepting around a UI for mobile phone interface that sort of ties into some other work we've been doing. There's, here's an example of the Toroid project. So this is, I guess now I'm just doing a little educational plug for what's interesting about processing. So the impressive bit is that you can, it's open source, so you can go and find these projects. And for my part, basically someone had written the complex math on how do you build a donut, which is called a toroid. And you can go in and just start understanding how to, or talking about how to tell the story. Like what I want is something that increases in mass and decreases and whatever. This is all a bit garish as in terms of having slick presentation purposes. I think it's fun to feel like you're developing an idea really quickly and in something that feels kind of high fidelity. So if I'm someone who's not an industrial designer, I don't really have any tools of 3D rendering to rely on. It's interesting to start looking from the perspective of code. And just trying to hack together cute little things that work. So this was the sort of Android app concept I was working out. Was I could take an NFC-enabled Android phone and tap some NFC tag or like an Oyster card that you triggered. That could then establish a value in this app. So you set the value at whatever. You could also have this slider that does it. So this is obviously really scalable, not really working out. Anyway, then that transaction could send an array to the other toroid thing, and I could have some kind of a mock presentation on how one would affect the other. Anyway, so that's like the high-tech version, but really what you miss here is the whole experience of what does it actually feel like and what's the behavior. So for me, it was really a good insight to bring home and to hammer home now is that the sort of tech exuberance actually can get in the way of the experience. And so it took getting back to basics. Anyway, look forward to continuing to kind of workshop the idea and present more back, let you know whether this goes any further with the IP guys or whether we have any ideas to share back to the wearables team. Thanks.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.